M. The Media Project. Driven by data. Driven by technology. Driven by community development. Driven by the need to get results for your project. SM Graves Associates. Delivering real estate development to you, including project management and pre-development services with a keen focus on delivering community-oriented projects. We build profitable projects that respond to the needs of your neighborhood. Join the SMG family. Find us at smgravesassociates.com.
Here it is. Once again, you are listening to another Innovato2 podcast. And for the first time in quite some time, all co-hosts of the Innovato2 podcast from all three sectors of the great state of Vermont are in the virtual studio. We have with us this afternoon, Ryan Munn.
Hello, hello. In a undisclosed location just outside of Vermont.
Super secret, hey. We also have Will Jeffries in the virtual studio. How are you, Will?
Pretty good, Scott. Calling from what I like to call the speakeasy of entrepreneurship in Burlington, the Vermont Center for Emerging Technologies, which is an amazing hub of entrepreneurship, but you wouldn't know it unless you knew it was there.
Like so many things in the great state of Vermont.
Many of the best kept secrets.
I, of course, am your third co-host, Scott M. Graves. Today, we are talking about artificial intelligence because, hey, it is top of mind as a current events topic, and we hope to broaden the conversation. So today, we're not here to talk about the tech and all that's fab about it in and of itself, but we're really taking a closer look at the consequences of tech. And I'm going to get us started. I've got a lot of reference points here to a number of journalists and industry people that I've been following now the last couple of years, in part in preparation for doing stuff like this with you guys. So I'm just, really excited that we can finally do this. I woke up yesterday morning and I'm reading the Substack to one of the many people I follow there on Substack, and Ted Goya was the title of the article was "The Force Feeding of AI on an Unwilling Public," and basically, makes the point that recent polling by industry showed that less than 8% of the United States population was looking forward to the unveiling in their email and general searches and so forth of using artificial intelligence as a replacement or a supplement to existing tech. And so what we've seen in the last couple of months, of course, is they went forward with it anyways, but they're instituting it in ways where you really have no choice, right? They're packaging it like Microsoft 365. I just got an announcement, right? The price is going up because it includes artificial intelligence. It includes their functionary Copilot. So good or bad, you're forced to pay for it, and you're forced to have it there, whether you're going to use it or not. And so that's what Soda Ted was talking about there. And so I wanted to start the conversation just around this whole idea of, what happens when the companies decide to unleash a tech on us, whether we like it or not, especially after the polling told them maybe we don't like it. Like, this doesn't make business sense.
Well, I would argue against that, because I think that ultimately people often don't like what they don't understand. There've been famous concerts in history where the sound was just so new that people rioted, but then a year later, they're the most popular sound in music.
Wait a minute. Are you comparing artificial intelligence to the rite of spring?
Okay.
Absolutely.
And the other piece of that I would say is that, to your point, if it wasn't released the way that it is being released, then just the most powerful, most informed, most capitalized people would be leveraging it anyway. And I believe that would be to the ultimate detriment of the population. So at the very least, the push or the quote unquote forcing of it down our throats, so to speak, granted, there are still ways to turn it off, ways to disengage from it, ways to not use it. But it does become harder and harder to avoid it. But at the same time, it's also available to be dove into and utilized in all aspects of our personal and professional life, in which case our employers and capital holders have less of an ability to use it to our detriment. I think that if ultimately it wasn't made so available, it's going to get used by those 8%. And a lot of other people are going to lose their jobs. They're going to fall behind in their professional skill sets in a way that would be unrecoverable.
I would feel better about that because you can, on many platforms, you can opt out. But I would feel better about that if you can opt out and then the fee goes away, right? So the fact that you're paying a higher price for a product, whether you opt out of the new part of that product or not, is, I don't know too many other industries where you can do that and not suffer, consequences.
I mean, you can't opt out of Excel, can you, from the Microsoft 365 package, right? Like if you pay for a Google Suite, you get all the Google Suite, even if you're only using Docs.
Well, I suppose one could argue, I want to see if you have some ideas on this, but I'll just lastly say you could opt to go with because you're buying a suite, you're told that ahead of time.
Right.
You could go and you could buy a whole different other platform.
Yeah, I think that's exactly where I was about to go, Scott, is the difference that I'm seeing here in this conversation. And Ryan, I love you're pulling the music analogy in with Scott, our historical music buff in the room here. But I think the difference that you're talking about is when it's integrated into a suite, something that you already use that's already incorporated into your business or into your life, and then this other quote unquote feature is incorporated that impacts a lot of things you were already using that maybe a lot of people felt like didn't need to change, as in the case of Microsoft 360. And maybe there is an option to turn it off, maybe not, but it does feel a little bit different from, say, the release of a specific tool of, hey, this is an AI tool. You can opt in, you can download this and use this for your specific part of life, whether it's note taking and transcripts, for one example. Hey, I want an AI note taker that can then create tasks for me. And you go and you find that and you download it. With the difference being something like Microsoft 360, it's an entire suite, it's already incorporated. And what does that look like? Or my favorite example is actually Google searches. With the way that AI is generating this overview at the beginning, and there is an option to turn that off, but at the same time, it's saturating the responses that people receive. And actually, an even larger impact, I feel like, is in the images search for Google. Now there are so many AI-generated images, and one very specific example, because my wife's also an artist, is when she would try and look up images as references for painting or for sketching, for figure drawing. All of a sudden, the Google search for images has just been flooded with anatomically incorrect images that are not what she needed anymore. When she used to be able to do a quick Google search of something or a certain pose, for example, and find exactly what she needed. So where does that line get drawn where something is an opt-in versus it's simply saturating the environment? And we've seen a couple of examples of this, but this one feels somehow more significant than anything that I can recall, at least in my own lifetime, of the speed, the saturation of it.
That gets us into sort of an interesting segue, because we've talked, the three of us, at length on this podcast about, the idea that, millions of artists' content, visual, audio, and otherwise, is being aggregated. And, I don't know if I'm speaking for myself or I'm speaking for all three of us, but I for one will say I'd like a financial model where we pay blanket licenses to all those people, right? Like,
Yes.
just like in the past, you had to pay a blanket license. You own a nightclub, right? You pay a blanket license for the usage rights. Just like and we could be doing it, and we're not, right? So we've talked about just the amendment of that sort of financial model, right? Not to stop people from using the content, but to create a new avenue of revenue, right? That benefits both parties. Same Substacker, Ted Goya wrote recently on June 15th, a very interesting article that, among other sort of factoids, one that stuck out with me from that article was, for the first time in history, more bets are being made in the gambling market on music, on audio files, than there are actual audio files being produced.
Wait, explain that again. Those might be some terms that our audience might not be fully familiar with.
So, and then I'll also explain how it relates to artificial intelligence. We've talked about sort of the commodification of artistic expression, right? Like, what social consequences?
Right.
What does it mean when large swaths of the population basically aren't incentivized anymore to actually even consider why they would create artistic expression on an amateur level, right? Which is, creating art isn't a thing. It's not a job. I mean, it's an innate need in human experience, right? We need to express ourselves in different ways over our lifetimes. That's one of the core ways that we need to do that. And a lot of people already don't kind of really do that. But at any rate, to go back for a moment, the article was just talking about, here, I'll bring it up. Why listen to music when you can gamble on it? This chart from my State of the Culture article went viral last year. Many commented on the disturbing shift from playing sports to watching them, and then finally to just gambling on them. And as far as music goes, he's saying we have this, in quote unquote slow traditional culture, you have albums. In the fast modern culture, we got down to tracks and individual files, right? The proverbial single, down to dopamine culture, he's calling it, which is down to TikTok. TikTok videos. I actually experienced this myself recently. I went to a wedding for my niece. It was a lovely wedding. It was wonderful in every way. The DJ played for about 2 hours and never once, not once, played a single entire song. He played what I would consider to be the key most recognizable components, whether they be a verse or a bridge and a chorus of songs mixed together. And I don't know how many other people in this entire room, noticed this. I was pretty disgusted in a sense, because it's sort of like it's the furthering of the commodification of the music, right? The music isn't there for you to listen to the music. The music is meant to impulsively and more rapid fire and quickly garner a sense of nostalgia, or it's meant to toy with your emotions for that key moment enough to get you to the next song, right? It's there in service to something other than the pure listening to somebody else's artistic expression. Some people would say I'm overthinking this, right? But it's an interesting thing. And the article goes on further to just talk about the fact that in different ways, people are finding in the online betting world to bet on, say, what's going to be a hot album or whatnot. There's more people doing that now online than there are people actually listening to music.
Is this poly market?
What's that?
Is this poly market?
I'm not understanding the reference.
Poly market is a place where people bet on real world events.
I don't know.
Like poly market was, basically 70% predicted the outcome of the presidential election.
Got it.
Right. So tends to be more accurate than polls because people put their money where their opinion is, and that gets reflected on poly market. But they'll bet on all kinds of stuff like if somebody's going to get, pardoned, to if an album is going to hit the top 10 in the charts or anything like that, can all be gambled on and polymarket.
And keep in mind, I'm not coming at this because I'm against gambling. I'm coming at this. What are the long-term social consequences of a society that devalues artistic expression? While on the other side of that, I'm not even saying they're related, but on the other side of that, gambling and risk-taking is growing.
Right.
As a business.
Well, notice the commonality there between the shortening down to the snippets of the song that create an emotional reaction, right? A nostalgic connection through that emotional spike. And why is gambling addictive? It's what creates that quick emotional spike.
I didn't catch that. And I like what you call it there, that emotional spike, right? It's it's what Ted's talking about, the dopamine culture, right? Right? Like this over and over and over again. I didn't even think of that. That's even worse than what I was really thinking.
Yeah, I like where you went with that, Ryan. I was wondering the same thing.
I mean, to bring it back to AI, right? Like that's part of our obsession with AI right now in the moment is this generative technology just hits those triggers, right? And it's trained to do that, right? This generative iteration of AI that we have in these past couple of years, besides the decades of research and development that has gone on and is still going on in the field of AI, that isn't necessarily all what we think of today when we think about what's commercially available in AI. There's a whole lot more to it than that. But what's become commercially available and extremely popular is the thing that gives us all these dopamine hits, right? It's the thing that takes something we wrote and polishes it up so it's nice and slick, or it takes something really long and summarizes it into that short little snippet that makes you feel like you know what it's all about without actually doing all the work to read it. It's the thing that takes your notes for you and puts them into an email for you, and ultimately summarizes these conversations for us so we could do a quick search and put something together for it, and using AI to create a document from a conversation to put together an agreement between businesses. Like, all those things are, in theory, very powerful, but they're also built on this foundational tech that is purely basing its results on a prediction about feeding our impulsive likes and dislikes.
And in many ways, that's actually built into the software itself, because if you notice, at least ChatGPT, there are many different models, but let's take the most common one. Its tendency is to provide the answer that will make you happy. Its tendency is to provide the answer that you want most of all, more necessarily sometimes than the truth. And it's looking for, how are you wording this? What are you saying? And it's trying to give you what you want. But I would ask, at what cost?
So, Will, you're a guy I know that, you're trying to slow things down in certain aspects of your life. You and your fiance are out there dancing all the time, enjoying that aspect of culture, right? And so I'm wondering, just first, what you think about the consequences to people, about what it is that we're talking about, the substance of it, and then how do we solve some of these? How do we reverse this process or find balance?
Well, it all comes down to culture, right? I mean, we've said this enough times that all of these are tools and it's how it's used, but what's the culture behind what you're asking society to create and what you're creating and putting into society? So for us, it's so important to remain grounded and to find time to slow down and to find ways to connect with people. And in my own work, I really am asking myself, what do I want to see more of in the world? What is the kind of world and the kind of community that I want to be a part of? And then how are we building those values into our businesses, into the services or the products that we put out into the world? Very often, that's one of my first questions when I sit down with a founder is 2 questions. One, what's the impact that you want to have in your community, whether that community is your neighborhood or that community is a country or the world? What if you are ultimately successful, what's the impact that you want that to have? What's the change you want that to have in the world? And number two is, what do you want to have for an impact in your own lifestyle, in the life that you are living for yourself? Does that mean that you want to be working 60 hours a week on this project because it is what gets you fired up in the morning and it's what makes you excited? Or is it something where you want to work 20 hours a week on this business once it's up and rolling, and you've got a general manager and you spend the rest of the time traveling the country or working remotely or visiting all the national parks in the country? And both of these are really, really reasonable goals to have as an aspiration for your life, for the life that you want to live. But you have to think about that at the start. If you're going to get there in the end, you need to be thinking about that at the beginning so that you can keep that line in mind. Because if you don't think about the end, the outcome of that, you're just hitching yourself onto a train that's going in some direction and you don't know what that is. And you could end up where you want to be. But if you didn't put that intention in from the start, you could easily end up somewhere else on that spectrum that you're not expecting or desiring to be.
I'm actually.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Finish. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I think that intentionality is so important from the beginning. And similar for a technology like this, like AI, responsible AI, similar to how I think with founders about starting a business, or if you are creating a community in your community, if you are organizing a dance community, if you're organizing an artistic community, what's the values underneath that underlie that are going to guide you towards that outcome that you're hoping to create, rather than just being carried along?
That's a great vision. We recently had Peter Voss on the podcast, and which I want to thank Ryan for, because Ryan put that together, and I haven't seen you, Ryan, to actually say thanks for putting that together, Ryan. Well, but I also, this is my first chance to sound off with you, Ryan. You know, like, we haven't had a chance to talk about just the experience of having talked to him and about his vision. I want to lay down a potential reality for the future around this. And for our listeners, you know, Peter Voss is advocating for a form of artificial general intelligence and its use, by which both in form and in the formation of legal entities, you know, around the way business would provide the AGI to the world and so forth. In every respect, it would be a program, if you will, designed that individuals are able to leverage the technology and have it be very accessible to each of us as individuals, and leverage it to our maximum benefit to help enhance very human work that we're already doing, right? This would also be a world in which we're not using artificial intelligence as a threat to labor or to literally, you know, eliminate labor, but we're saying to labor, we're going to make you more valuable in the work that you do. Or it could be an artist, right? We're going to help you increase your capabilities in some way by leveraging this technology. And I just think that's a wonderful world. I would add to that, though, and then I also want to get your feedback on this, the two of you, is having grown up myself and just having been lucky enough to be having been absolutely immersed in the arts from an extremely young age. In fact, so young, I can't remember when I started. In both the visual arts and the performing arts, and having been encouraged in doing so, I think what makes for better outcomes in technology is if our technologists, as young adults, were first immersed in a much more robust arts and humanities education, and for society to really rethink the way we do K through 12 education from the standpoint of spending a lot of time away from the technology, immersed in things that are going to make us better artists, better creatives, better citizens, right? To have to really think through political economy and philosophy, right? And then at the same time, at age appropriate intervals, to incorporate the technologies and to very intentionally teach people these perspectives. Like to say, this technology is best used when you have made decision X, Y, Z, and then you leverage the technology to help you enhance that experience. You see what I'm saying? So it's a combination of intention, but also exactly to Will's point, this, create the better artist, create the robust artist, create the citizen that you want to see first, who will be more responsible with better use of the technology. So Ryan, just maybe for starters, just because we haven't had a chance to talk about that, that was a pretty life-changing interview for, I think, the two of us.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, a lot of it aligns with, my longtime belief in open source technology and in the concepts of decentralization and, the ability to do that enabled by emerging technology, and also observing how those technologies aren't necessarily accepted and adopted rapidly in our world because the large tech companies don't necessarily embrace it because it's not necessarily in their interest. So, it's interesting watching this current generation of AI and how we're using it. And again, I'll go back to that initial statistic of, that you'd mentioned of, 8% of people actually wanting it, whereas the rest of them are just kind of getting it. I think that, we have to kind of know what we have and what we don't have in order to know what we want sometimes. And so I think that's the piece that I'm hopeful that the constant exposure will take this generation to the point of recognizing the limitations of the existing technology, the limitations of the existing models of ownership and operation of that technology, in order to have the ability to desire a better model, to desire a better format of ownership and control over this technology, how we individually access it. And really, it's pretty inspiring to hear someone like Peter Voss speaking in a way that really validates a lot of the work that I've seen and done over the past 7, 8, 9 years, and observed what that's built on in terms of really empowering individual agency. The idea that artificial general intelligence, even though it sounds and is more advanced than the current type of AI, it also consumes a lot less power, requires a lot less resources, requires a lot less capital, and provides a lot more agency and individual contribution to people. So, the idea that an artist could truly have their own agent that is really helping them enhance their own creativity while also helping them enhance their ability to leverage legal services, leverage medical services, leverage interpersonal services and support. I mean, the potential for mental health and wellness benefits alone is huge. In the idea that people could actually have their own private AI that is ethically bound and built and able to support and help and grow the individual person without the leakage and exchange of that data with data brokers and without the violation of privacy that can and frankly does exist with the current generations of technology. So yeah, it was great to really hear the decades of work that have gone into this, and the idea that we are on the threshold of artificial general intelligence being developed, and the potential for us to really have it at our fingertips in the next 3 to 5 years is exciting, to say the least. But it's also a little bit scary if it comes and goes and people just don't take advantage of it because they don't even know enough to want it, right? They don't know enough to see the difference.
With fast-moving and sweeping changes to our economy in the works, we all need to reconsider how our investments are best placed. At Partners in Housing, we believe your money is best placed locally. Utilized to increase value and provide stable and desirable housing to your neighbors. Contact Partners in Housing to find out how you can participate in local housing opportunities by joining the Partners in Housing Fund. look us up at partnersinhousingvt.com or email us at partnersinhousingvt@gmail.com.
How much of that do you think is affected by the fact that, OpenAI raised a lot of money, right? And so I just wonder if that is to blame in part or in whole for large language models being the dominant force here, right? So for our listeners and for the uninitiated in particular, large language models are, when Peter Voss is advocating for artificial general intelligence, AGI does not take advantage of large language models. It's a much more refined form of artificial intelligence. I just wonder if we've sort of, in the rush for everyone to put their billions of dollars into artificial intelligence, if we've pigeonholed ourselves into the wrong, models. Certainly from a financial modeling standpoint, it seems like everything is wrong, right? And I wonder if that also contributes to things like what started our conversation. Hey, 8% of the population polled said they want this technology, but they're going to get it nonetheless because we got a lot of riding on this, right? We got a lot of beans riding on this, and we'll never be able to pay this back unless we get everybody to adopt it, right?
Right. Yeah. That's the reality. And that's also the vested interest that is potentially adversarial to the truly beneficial technologies that are open source and likely have a much lower cost of operation and ownership.
Sounds like a whole conversation to be had around exactly how technology is funded and what types of incentives that is going to create, as well as another one, just putting a pin in it, to also consider Monique Priestley's work on data privacy, as you brought up, Brian, and how is that impactful here? But I think what I'm really hearing is, how can AI help to self-actualize, to support, not to displace, but to support the elements of our human selves and the creativity and the amazing pieces that make us human to self-actualize the most? How can it help us to reach the top of that hierarchy of needs that allows us to self-actualize and really bring our best selves to the situation? Is there a way to use AI to help us, even in the small ways, to navigate the DMV, for example, to get through annoying, difficult processes like that, or help make those better? When do all of us really need to become an expert on navigating the DMV, or do we just need a better process for that? Then again, do we even need AI, or is it just a matter of simpler forms and simpler processes? But that's a digression.
I fully appreciate, Will, your Jungian reference there to self-actualize, and I think that does get to the heart of it, right? That this needs to be all technologies, and we've talked about this on this podcast,
or otherwise.
All technologies should allow us. I recently went to the Strong Towns National Gathering. Chuck Marohn there said at his keynote address in the beginning, 3 things need to inform the work that we do. And I think it's not just urban planning. I think, all industries should follow these 3 main categories of human phenomenon. The first being stewardship, the second being empathy, and the third being humility. Right? If your tool is not helping us become better at those 3 things, you got to question, is there a better way to use your tool? Or is there a problem with the tool the way it was designed, right?
Well, and I'll shout out too, we've had some other guests on, another guest on talking about self-actualization. And just to further expand on that concept, right, is self-actualization isn't just about the individual, right? That's individual actualization. Self-actualization is also about systemic or societal actualization, because we are inherently a part of our community, of our family, of our society. And so self-actualization is something that isn't something that we individually do. It's something that we collectively do. And so while we want to be looking at those systems We also want to be looking at the tools that interface with those systems, like the DMV is a great example. It's interesting, though, to look at that and also take into consideration the challenges that we're facing today. And it brings to mind, really, like, very prevalent in the news right now is legislation to inhibit our ability as individual states and communities to regulate AI. And what's really interesting about this is the first thing that comes to mind is work like Monique Priestley's around the Data Privacy Act and how that might be leveraged or expanded to put some guardrails on AI. But also in the reverse, like regulating AI doesn't just mean restriction. It could also mean requirement to use this very effective tool that can make things like the DMV and navigating the law for the average layperson easier and more accessible, or navigating taxes and accounting easier and more accessible. And if we're being restricted from a national level, from individually as states or communities, from implementing these tools as a matter of regulation, that brings a real challenge. And so I think it's interesting that, like, we have this history in this country of states not doing exactly what the feds want, right? Look at marijuana regulations and legislation. Look at marriage legislation, right? There's been lots of examples where the states buck the national initiatives. And I think it's really important, actually, that we think about that today and keep those frames of reference in mind as we move forward, as looks by all angles right now, like the national legislation is going the direction of trying to restrict this, and for people to stand up, and whether they want the tool or not, I think that it'd be great to come to a consensus that we want the rights over the tool, right? We want the rights as individuals, as communities, to be able to have a say over how we receive these tools, how we use these tools, how we implement these tools. And that's where individuals, I think, can and need to step up and voice some thoughts and, learn more about what it really means for themselves and their society.
So reference points here for our listeners, for those outside of Vermont. My esteemed co-hosts here both mentioned Monique Priestley. She is, of course, a state rep from Orange County here in the great state of Vermont, who is leading on data privacy legislation, 2 years running now, having to pivot multiple times in 2 legislative sessions. And this has really become national. She's gained a lot of attention, along with her cohorts in other states, including Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Montana, and others that are each in their own way working on data privacy legislation. Interesting that this is happening in both red and blue states. You also both secondarily mentioned, and now we'll sort of segue into that. The big I hate even the name of it, but the one big beautiful bill that was passed last week included a provision that outlawed states. It's well, I shouldn't say outlawed. They get me on that. It prohibits individual states for the next decade from passing legislation that in any way would inhibit the rollout of any form of artificial intelligence. And I do not know what version, House, Senate, or second House, was passed in the end, but at different intervals, it included various forms of punishment against legislators and governors should they attempt to pass legislation. Now, the irony here, in so many things in this conversation, and any conversation with artificial intelligence, of course, leads to other human phenomenon. So in the realm of our democracy and the way our democratic republic operates, I find it rather convenient, first off, and no little bit of irony, that the same political party that is always espousing the ideas of, the individual states and their right to self-legislate, that's the incubator for new ideas for the federal government to enact later on for the nation. And in this one instance, they literally want to outlaw, possibly even attempting to legally punish elected officials in said states all to favor one industry, which is really made up of one large investment made in OpenAI, and then, conceivably all the other big tech leaders, right? The major institutions, the major corporations, global institutions that are initiating all of their own platforms. I don't know if any of you were feeling the same way or have something to say about that, but that's crazy to me.
And for a little bit of additional context, going beyond Vermont and beyond even the United States, as an example comparison, recently passed legislation in the EU, the EU IA Act, that's had a fair bit of press in the community the past few months. But part of how that approaches AI and the rollout of AI is identifying different risk levels. It took a fairly nuanced approach, I felt like. And I'm also curious to hear what other folks here think. But defining that in several different categories. For example, it has an unacceptable risk category where AI use is actually fully outlawed, banned in the EU. And this includes cognitive intentional manipulation of people or vulnerable groups, as well as classification and identification and categorization using biometrics. And then it progresses down from there into a high risk category, such as, let's see, I have it here. Anything involving aviation, cars, medical devices, somewhere where someone's life might be on the line is considered high risk. And so that's more heavily regulated. And then down to a level, there's a fairly big jump from there down to the next level where it's simply a transparency requirement. Something like ChatGPT, it's requiring that images that were produced by that be disclosed as having been generated by AI, trying to avoid the deep fake issue, or designing the models to prevent them from generating illegal content. And so you've got it's fairly straightforward, but also a little bit more nuanced in, hey, we're seeing these as a riskier application and a more open application of AI.
Well, and one of a million examples, and this is taken from the political space, but we'll all remember this from mid-May. This is a commondreams.org headline: Trump ambushes South African president with white genocide lies. Now, this happened in the Oval Office, and the president of the United States, Donald Trump, held up a document, a paper document, when the South African, the president of South Africa said, yeah, this whole idea of, the Afrikaners and white genocide isn't true. And he held up, no, look here, see this, we just got this from the internet. And it was an AI generated imagery. And there was a whole article, right? Which was entirely fake. It was proven to be fake. And the president of the United States is saying, no, see, it's on the internet. And it's an artificially generated writing and artificially generated imagery, right? And this is happening all the time. And Will, you bring up, in addition to just, its consequences, the political space and journalism or not journalism, but biometrics and, there's other even more frightening ways that it could be misused, right? If it's not, right, somehow regulated, or at least it's not guardrails put up to say, you do this, that you'll suffer a consequence, right? Some would argue, well, yeah, but the people who do this, it's the same as, criminals with guns. I mean, when you regulate guns, you're only regulating it for honest people, because dishonest people are going to use them anyways, right? Exactly. But it feels like, well, if we do nothing, it seems like we proliferate bad models faster than actually encouraging good models,
Right. Well, I mean, this really brings up, we have all kinds of, frankly, backwards legislation and approach to resolving risk, because frankly, there's more money out there to scare people off of the right answer, right? Like our whole problem with guns, regulation or no regulation, we have regulation on guns. That regulation says you're not allowed to use computers to track them. That's the problem, right? Like the actual office, the one little office that's supposed to regulate and track all the transactions of firearms in the whole country, is not allowed to have a computer.
Right.
Right. Like, so the same thing, like we keep talking like that whole thing in the EU, like it sounds like a nice nuanced approach, but really all of it would be completely unnecessary if we actually regulated the true identification of source, right? But if we regulated and required the true identification of source, then the tech companies would have to admit that they can actually keep track of all this data because it's not impossible. And they'd have to actually compensate the places they're sourcing the data from. And if you had systems in place that required the identification of source, of provenance, well, then any image, any document, anything that's created would have a signature on it, a digital signature, and you'd be able to very easily validate where it came from.
Yeah.
And if you can't validate that, and you simply don't trust it, and if you can validate it, then the source is held accountable.
And we already know, we've talked at great length on this show about, the technology already exists to do this, right? It's called blockchain technology, right? We already know that. There's a deeper element here, though, Ryan, and that is, besides, in essence, we're talking about the easy part. The harder part is forms of information that you can access on me without my knowledge, or even after my knowledge, your use of it without my consent, which is the second tranche that's also important, that I'm most concerned with. My, medical information and all that. And especially now that it's becoming increasingly obvious that you could either say it was intentional in the first place and was the real reason for its existence, or you can say, well, it was an accident consequence of its existence. But we now know that one of the consequences post the Doge experiment in the last few months has been that previously it was not legal for interagency communication on individual American citizens' information. The Department of Labor could not share its information, if they have it, on you as an individual with the Department of Social Security. And then that information can't all then go to the FBI, that the FBI's information can't go. And the reason for this is a long time ago, well before there was digital technology, it was decided that it was not fair to individual citizens if there was interagency sharing of data about individual citizens.
So it sounds like two major topics here are, one, the sourcing for tracing and accountability of information so that you can trace back where an image or a document came from, what is the source of that, and trace that back reliably and accountably. And the second one that Scott brought up is the personal data security. Where is your personal data on the internet? How is it being used? How is it being secured? Is there a third topic here, or does this cover the broad categories?
No, that's just it, Will. And Ryan and I are on the same page as far as, the use of blockchain, because you can track things. It has a footprint, right? It has a fingerprint, rather.
Right.
But in the first place, I would then also additionally say that even in a digital age, I like the idea, even if it has to be an amendment in a newer version of our Constitution, to say that government agencies at the state and federal level cannot share information so that you can then more quickly profile citizens, even if all that information is on blockchain. What I'm trying to prevent here, to be as sinister as possible, since we know it's now happening, okay, I don't want to be targeted because of my political beliefs by a police state in the future. I don't want to be targeted by I don't want to make a mistake in my business that then the IRS can create can send it to federal law enforcement, and they can create a total profile on me that has absolute dire consequences, not only on me for my mistake, but on my entire nuclear family. Right? There are reasons why our past leaders, even as they could have used that power, right, said, we're going to create guardrails, and these guardrails should last now and into the future. And for 200 years, we had those guardrails. And for the first time in 200 years, we don't any longer. Those agencies, one of Doge's consequences has been to create a singular intersection between all those agencies' digital files, such that if the FBI now wants to profile you or me or anybody, they know every time we've interacted with the federal government, they'll know why. They'll know how much money we received. We'll know how much money was taken back. They'll know our tax history. They'll know if we owe taxes. Imagine a world where there's a a very authoritarian police state in power, and they find out that your business isn't doing so well, you've had some political statements in the past that they're really upset about. And they also find out that you owe $500,000 in back taxes. Now, before you even know that they know that information, they have leverage points over you that they can use to squeeze you.
Mm.
And that's as if the government is the mafia. And we should all be concerned about that. It seems like I've been the Debbie Downer. Nobody's saying anything.
I think it's landing, and it's too real.
And here we are, right? So
here we are.
I just, and maybe it's a good time for us to get everybody's final thoughts on just like how to wrap all this together, and just maybe even words of wisdom for our listeners. Who would like to start with maybe some final thoughts on?
I think that, I think people have to open their mind to these technologies, and realizing what they can and will do for us, what they can and may do against us, right? And I think letting go of certain fears too. It's not about fearing the technology. It's about respecting the potential consequences of misuse. But it's fear of technology that's preventing us from using technology where it needs to be used, right? And it's the lack of awareness that's preventing people from being empowered by it. So I would say that folks, need to take a deep breath and, take the time to learn what these technologies can do for us, and then step up for their actual rights, learn their individual rights, their state rights, communicate with their legislators, get their voice heard about these separations of the federal and state governments, the separations that are originally built into the foundations of our country that are being eroded, and really stand up for some of these historical ideas that really do matter, and they can be applied in a digital age, and the digital technology can be built around those concepts and standards. But right now, we're definitely heading toward a different track, right? We're breaking down those barriers. We're eliminating accountability. There's a lot of ways that we're removing the opportunity and really just setting up a lot of potential risk in the way that these laws and technologies are being applied.
Yeah, I like how you're approaching that, Ryan, that actually what we're talking about here is culture, governance, and our communities, having an informed community, an informed population, and a government and a society that is here to support people's well-being. That fundamentally, that's what it comes back to. And I think this conversation about AI has been a gateway for that. And to your point earlier, many technologies have come along, blockchain, AI, even cell phone technology, that can be an enabler. But fundamentally, it comes down to how do you use that technology? How do you use that tool in your society, in your community? How does it impact your daily life? But to do that, you might need to be informed about it. There are some technologies that can come along, like the way that cellular towers work, for example, transmitting technology or satellites, that may not have a direct impact and needful change in your immediate society and community, or maybe they do. But these are some examples of ways in which the tool is changing our society. And we have an opportunity here to turn that in a direction that we want to see in the future, to begin with the end in mind and to walk along that as informed citizens of the present into a better future.
And I think that by creating better artists and better engaged citizens, and by doing so, by completely and properly resourcing people from a young age, right on through until they're adults, will yield the best results for not only artificial intelligence, and I particularly think artificial general intelligence is the way to go, but also in every other aspect of our society right now that is lacking more than any other aspect. Our Vermont's own Garrett Graff. I saw him recently on a podcast with Rick Wilson and a few other guys, and he put it right then and there. He said the difference between, say, Watergate 50 years ago and now was that there were people 50 years ago that recognized that it was their guy, right, who they had to now, impeach. But they did so unwaveringly because if we all in the room or in society agree on a fundamental set of principles, right, the rule of law, the value of our republic as a republic, the value of each other as a community of humans, right? If you believe in all that, regardless of everything we layer on top of that, political party affiliation, class, race, etc., right? Then when somebody basically breaks the law, you say, well, that person's wrong. And so what he said was the difference between then and now, character. Our leaders have no character. Our leaders are more interested in the money they make and the favors they can get and the favors they can give. And they don't want to lose that. And the fear of losing that for most people who have something to lose is greater than
Character.
The need that we all agree on a fundamental set of principles that we all live and abide by. And so I think if we can get back to that, then AI is going to benefit us. If we can get back to that, renewable energy is going to benefit us. We get back to that and completely reforming immigration in the United States, whatever, economic policy, fiscal policy, right? It all gets better when we all are working off of a fundamental set of principles that we all believe in and we all abide by. And that they're soulful and good and right by each other. We do right by each other. I think it boils down to what I heard Chuck Marohn say a month ago, right? Stewardship, empathy, and approaching each other with great humility.
Well said, Scott.
You have listened to another Innovato 2 podcast. Guys, it is always a pleasure, and I'm really glad that we could get the three of us in the same virtual room together.
Agree. Pleasure, gentlemen.
Happy listening.
Find Innovato 2 on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and subscribe to Interchain Live on YouTube for video podcasts. Innovato 2 is a collaboration of Interchain Live and M the Media Project.